Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Stephen Bader, Executive Director of the East Bay Economic Development Alliance. We'd like to welcome all of you to our 2022 membership meeting. To kick us off, I'm going to hand it over to our chair, the Honorable Supervisor Keith.
Thank you very much, Stephen, and good morning to everyone, and welcome to the 2022 East Bay EDA membership meeting. As Stephen said, my name is Keith Carson, and I have the privilege of being the chair of the East Bay Economic Development Alliance, better known as East Bay EDA. As we begin today, I want to say a big thank you for joining us this morning at our webinar that we're having. We always look forward to our annual fall membership meetings, and so we're really happy that you've joined us. While we're very much enjoyed doing in-person events such as the East Bay Innovations Award, we also do a lot of events that are webinars or Zoom meetings, and we're very fortunate to have technology that allows us an easy way to convene with people, especially coming through this pandemic. And it's also an important way for us to get out timely information and topics. So again, a big thank you for joining us this morning. We're glad that you've joined us and to learn a little bit more about our organization if you don't know, or get updates about the many things that we've been doing over the last year, all of the things that have been impacting the area we live and love and the region. As you can see on the supply, we are a deeply rooted regional economic development organization that was founded more than 30 years ago to help East Bay EDA businesses and everybody grow and to be the best that they can be in the place that we love and work and do business and grow our business as well. East Bay EDA has more than 150 cross-sector members from business, government, nonprofit, and other organizations. We provide localized research for business support services to these members, and we frequently partner with them to help promote and to sponsor their events as well. East Bay EDA has been known for our events, and we hope that you joined us earlier this year when we held two large in-person events, including the 10th annual East Bay Innovations Award. And since we are in Zoom, over the course of the pandemic, we've had over 20 virtual events, not including the one that we're hosting today. East Bay EDA does a lot of work to generate original content and information for our members and our stakeholders. Members and others of you who are familiar with our work and are just that know that just a little over a year ago, East Bay EDA unveiled the East Bay Forward Report, an economic roadmap on how our region will fulfill our vision to realize a more equitable, resilient, and sustainable economic future. With COVID-19 first hit our communities back in the spring of 2020, we were all thrust into unknown situations. Since then, we have seen different developments and events changes come as a result of our behaviors or all the way we process information, and even our systems change that we continue to do, either in terms of our research or to watch the system changes take place in real time. This slide leads me to today's event. As things continue to evolve and a number of conditions and trends that we are already underway, beginning to experience, are being accelerated or even exacerbating the economic and health disparities that we continue to grapple with, we thought it was very important to pause and to look at the current economic conditions that we're all experiencing today. I know that a lot of the text that is on this slide that you see is what you know to be the reasons for the priorities and recommendations that came out of the East Bay Forward Report. They are carefully developed and refined over the course of several months, thanks to the input of many of our partners and key stakeholders, including the strategic advisory committees comprised of key regional leaders from the public, private, and the nonprofit sector. I hope that you'll go back and download the entire report if you haven't received it. We also have it on hard copy. You can go and look at our website and read it. A lot of important information that we're still executing in government and in the private sector. And we hope that each of you will reach out to our East Bay EDA staff, which has been doing an incredible job over the last several years, navigating this technological terrain that we have had to use in order to communicate, led by Stephen Bader. And I just want to say a big thank you from the officers and the executive committee for the ongoing work that our incredible staff has been doing. Events take time and resources, and we'd like to thank our longstanding East Bay EDA member, which is Bank of America, for being the sponsor for today's annual membership meeting. And also I'd like to say a thank you to Southwest Airlines for being our event gift sponsor. One lucky registrant for today's event will win 2 round-trip tickets anywhere that Southwest Airlines flies within the United States. And so I'd like to say again, thank you for joining us this morning. And here to say a few words and introduce today's keynote speaker is Micah Castanaro, Senior Vice President, Senior Relations Manager for the Bay Area market for Bank of America. And again, thank you very much.
Good morning, and thank you for that warm introduction, Keith. As Keith mentioned, Micah Canistero, I'm a Senior Relationship Manager within our business banking group. And essentially my team's primary job is to support local businesses and their employees achieve their financial goals. So needless to say, today's topic is, it has us all interested. Likewise, I want to thank East Bay EDA for hosting this incredible event. And it's a great honor for me to introduce our keynote speaker. But before I do that, I'll share some of the efforts Bank of America has made in the communities we serve with partnerships with East Bay EDA, delivering progress against society's biggest challenges. This includes our focus to help address the affordable housing shortage through innovative capital deployment in our local communities. We're also determined to help make home ownership more affordable. How we do this, for example, Bank of America Community Development Banking has a program that provides financing for affordable housing and economic development across the U.S. In 2021, we provided more than $6.6 billion in debt and equity financing, creating nearly 12,000 units of affordable housing for U.S. individuals, families, veterans, seniors, and the previously homeless. Since 2012, we've provided $108 million in grants to organizations working towards affordable housing. In 2021, we announced a $60 million investment to support Enterprise Community Partners Equitable Path Forward. This is a 5-year initiative to help facilitate racial inequity in housing. We've tripled our Bank of America community homeownership commitment to $15 billion through 2025, which has surpassed our original $5 billion commitment to help 60,000 low to moderate income individuals and families purchasing a home. Since 2019, we've helped nearly 23,000 individuals and families purchase a home, providing nearly $20 million in down payment and closing cost grants. We've expanded our neighborhood assistance homeownership program goal, providing $15 billion in mortgages to low to moderate home buyers through May 2027. Now, those were some large numbers I just shared, but with all that said, I'll just close by saying there's still plenty of work to be done, but together we can make a difference. And so without further ado, we're excited to learn more about the state of the East Bay real estate market from our informative presentation from JLL's Alexander Quinn, Director of Research, Northern California, about current real estate and economic trends. So please join me in welcoming Alexander Quinn. Thank you.
Thank you, Micah. Give a thumbs up if you can see my screen. It's always the most difficult part of my presentation. Okay, great. Well, welcome everyone. And I'm going to try to do this quickly. I believe that this is going to go across the group, so you'll be able to look through this at your leisure. You may have read that California is set to surpass Germany in terms of total GDP. So it'll be number 5 in the world in terms of size of economy. But what's the size of the Bay Area economy is always, I have to start that question. So, well, let's get into it. If it's just the East Bay, otherwise known as Alameda and Contra Costa County, well, that's about the size of New Zealand or Peru. That would make us the 56th largest in the world. If we take the South Bay, San Francisco Peninsula, that's 427 billion, which is roughly the size of Vietnam or United Arab Emirates. If we start to just look specifically at Silicon Valley or Santa Clara, it's roughly 465 billion, which is Argentina or Norway. If you take the greater 9-county Bay Area, we are the size of Indonesia or Mexico, so quite large. Or if you take what's often called the mega region, we're at $1.6 trillion in economic activity, which is akin to Spain and Australia. So it gives you some context in just the size of the market. So let's just give a little bit of summary of what's happening in the economy overall. It is actually looking good for the moment. I know that's sometimes hard to believe in the throes of everything we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, but we actually are doing well. We're only 1% below where we were pre-pandemic levels, which would be February of 2020. This is the .com crash, and it was really focused in the Bay Area. So our recovery was incredibly long, over 150 months before we recover that employment. The financial crisis, whereas, was not nearly as significant here. Many of you know that in 2006, I believe, the iPhone was first brought out, and we were not as impacted as the rest of the country. And then here is the pandemic, and you can see obviously just the huge dive that we experienced, but a very much a V-curve recovery or V-shaped recovery. We're at 1% where we were pre-pandemic, whereas the US overall is in fact above that. In terms of employment levels and unemployment is incredibly low. Oakland is at 3.7%. We experienced massive unemployment during the pandemic and the shelter-in-place orders, but that's quickly fell down as things were lifted. And San Mateo is at 2.1%. San Francisco is at 2.3%, which really is well below historic averages. What's more important for us is labor force participation. Labor force participation informs our total employment growth. And if you look at that, we're about 14,000 below where we were pre-pandemic. That's pretty good. We've seen a significant rise over time in the total number of labor in our market, which is a healthy sign for us that we're starting to get more participants. This is by sector. So if you're looking at the purple, that is the Bay Area, the gray is the US. And you can see where the shift is from February of 2020 to as of September. So there's a lot of sectors in here that are doing incredibly well. Scientific research and development up 22.4% since February, so way above where we were pre-pandemic levels. Information sector is the tech sector mostly, as well as computer systems design. What I think is surprising to most people when they look at these numbers is the fact that the Bay Area outpaced in the tech sector here in the Bay Area compared to the US overall. So our percentage growth was faster. Where we have lagged, excuse me, is in the accommodation and arts and entertainment. So the tourism sector really still has not recovered. And many of you may not know that the most important economic sector for San Francisco proper is not in fact tech. In terms of in total employment, it is hospitality and it's tourism. That accounts for the largest share of total employment. And that is what has been lagging behind in San Francisco specifically. A lot of that driven by the fact that we still are not receiving the same number of tourists in the Chinese and Asian markets in general. This is venture capital investment. I want to stop here for a moment and just say 2021 was an anomaly. We had $131 billion in total VC investment in the Bay Area. It was around 33% of domestic investment. That's a little bit below where we have been over the last 4-year average in terms of, we generally average somewhere around 38% of US domestic and about 20% of global investment for the Bay Area. And we were slightly down as a share, but that number is crazy. It's 131 billion. That included SPACs, included a lot of companies that basically there was a lot of cash in the system and they were doubled down on. In most years, we would consider where we are right now at $62.7 billion as of September, a very healthy year. We're on pace to be the third highest on record, if not a little bit higher. We could be the second. My guess is we'll be somewhere around $70 billion, which would put us on a very healthy path this year, although we do know it is slowing down and that VC multiples are also decreasing. In other words, the amount of investment per valuation is decreasing. This just explains our share. And the East Bay is $6.7 billion. Now, that might not seem like a lot, but that's equivalent to DC, Austin, or San Diego. So the innovation is still based here in the Bay Area. It's still very much centered here. And this is just looking at where we are on occupancy. This is multifamily occupancy by market or by metro area. So if you think about it, this is February of 2020 compared to now, where we stand in terms of rent recovery, which is the horizontal axis, versus occupancy. And you can see a lot of markets saw significant growth. In fact, I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, but markets, Miami, for example, saw massive increase in overall rent. So a lot of when we talk about inflation, that's the area that really is getting it the worst, as well as in Phoenix, also the same dynamic. San Francisco is the only market that is still below its pre-pandemic level in terms of net effective rents. The East Bay is below the average, but still has increased above pre-pandemic. And this is just some of the markets and their rent per square foot. And the only reason I bring this up is if you look at Berkeley, Berkeley's at $4.77 per square foot. As many of you know, they charge on a per bed basis often, especially around the university. So very high net effective rents on a per square foot basis. If you took Berkeley as a neighborhood in San Francisco, it would be roughly the fifth most expensive neighborhood in, oh, well, it's right there. It's right there in the middle. Was it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Okay, so 6 most expensive neighborhood in San Francisco. So that's a pretty remarkable dynamic, and it's driven by obviously the student demand. So the thing that is hindering us moving forward is really that housing production and the jobs housing imbalance. We saw what would be presumed to be a reprieve as we had massive employment loss. But even at that level, we were still at 1.16 for the Bay Area overall, and we're at 1.33 per, so that's 1.33 jobs per housing unit as of Q2 2022. Why is that relevant? Well, typically you have 1.3 employed persons per household. So we are a net importer of housing from other markets. And this actually reduces our opportunities for growth within the Bay Area. So let's talk a little bit about what's happening at this very moment. I'm going to speak directly on office reentry and where we are. We're still a long way away We are 44% or 49% on average on a national level. But let's take a look at San Francisco and Silicon Valley, and you can see we're at 43% and 42% respectively. So why is that impacting us? Because it has cascading consequences on the surrounding downtown retail. It has impacts on transit use. It has a significant negative halo effect on our downtown areas, and actually from a fiscal perspective as well. And ultimately, we know that this is going to rise over time, albeit slowly. So our forecast really is that we have to move this up, or we're going to really struggle in our downtown areas. This is the occupancy levels just over time, and it's just been stubbornly low. So at 42%, what does that mean? It means on average, if you took 2019 numbers in San Francisco of weekly badge swipe data, and you compare it to the most recent week, we're at 42% of where we were in 2019. So the best market right now is Austin, which is at 64%. That's actually pretty good considering the hybrid work environment where more people are moving to Fridays and Mondays working from home. They're almost at capacity, but that's still, if you look at the Valley and San Francisco, really down on that number. So what does this mean from an office demand perspective? Right now, we're expecting it to be approximately, from a peak demand perspective, around 10% below where we were in aggregate demand. Now, that might seem like a small number, but let's just put this in context. The Bay Area is roughly 300 million square feet of office space, roughly. If you take a 10% shave of that's 30 million square feet of space. That is a large amount of space that is excess supply that gets placed on the market. And this is a national number. We think the technology sector is going to be more hybrid friendly and more work from home friendly than other industries. And of course, we know the Bay Area is specifically one of those markets that is concentrated in tech. So that number should in fact be even higher. This is just transit usage. One of the interesting phenomenons that we've seen is just San Francisco has just got a convergence of things that have impacted it, as has Oakland. We were much more transit dependent prior to the pandemic. We are more reticent to get on transit in comparison to other markets that are, we're at New York subway systems at 57%. San Francisco Bay Area is, or BART is really at 36%. But that's not the same on the auto traffic side. So these are the bridges, this is the toll bridge count that you can get on a monthly basis. But you can see that we are only down less than 10% since pre-pandemic levels. If you look at the Golden Gate Bridge, and if you look at the Bay Bridge overall. So traffic is back, as you know, and so people are driving. That activity has returned. It just really hasn't been on the transit side. Okay, so let's talk, tough turkey about the real estate office market and where we are at this very moment. Things have changed. We're at 21.2% vacancy. Asking rents are down a little, but not as much as you would imagine. And maybe in the Q&A, we can get into why that is. Leasing and volume has recovered a bit, especially in the Contra Costa Tri-Valley area. So if you're in the Walnut Creek or if you're in the Tri-Valley area, you've seen a bit of recovery on that side, whereas if you're in downtown Oakland, not so much. So these are total vacancy in the inner East Bay. So this would be, you could see that the Oakland CBD is at 25.6%. Berkeley is relatively healthy at 9.6%, but recognize that that is a much smaller supply. This is the change over time. So this is from Q1 2020 to Q3 2022. you can see that we've gone overall from a vacancy of 12.1% to 20.8%. In fact, this is not as bad as San Francisco, but really on track with the same direction. The real difference between us and San Francisco and the Inner East Bay is that we don't have the same amount of sublease vacancy as San Francisco does. This is the 680 corridor, similar type of stats, but really some divergence across the market. So you can see places like Dublin, Pleasanton are a little bit healthier, whereas Walnut Creek, I'm really talking about the areas that have a lot of concentration of office. These smaller markets don't have much of an impact on impacting the overall needle in terms of vacancy. This is the shift over time. So this again, from Q1 of 2020 to where we are today, you can see the significant rise in vacancy. San Ramon is one of those that has been exceptionally hit as well, Bishop Ranch. But this is leasing activity for the East Bay, and you can see that on average, we average around 630,000 square feet of quarterly office leasing activity, and we exceeded that at 680,000 this quarter. A lot of that was in the 680 corridor and not in Oakland. This is just looking at 50K plus deals. So 50,000 square feet deals are 8 within the East Bay. That's a really good amount for year to date. We'll probably get 2 more, so we should be at 10 by the end of the year, is my expectation, which would be a very, very healthy amount of leasing activity. This is exceptional, especially considering what's happened in places like San Francisco, where we just haven't had the same level of activity. And I think it's, we have 7 50K deals out on the 680 corridor. That is the highest number we've had in the last 20 years. I'll stop there. I mean, we talk about the race to the suburbs. This is a surprising stat. Unchained Labs, Stanford Healthcare. So there are a number of bigger deals that have happened in the outer East Bay, not so much in downtown Oakland. And this is just deals over 100,000 square feet. Again, really high watermarks for the East Bay and the 680 corridor. So, but the vacancy tells a different story. We're still exceptionally high. We're at 21.4%. And, if you look at the CBD, we're at 25.6%. which again are all-time highs, and compare that to, say, San Francisco, which is at 24.1%. Ultimately, that number, 25.6%, should start to slow down or decrease in downtown Oakland as PG&E occupies its space at Lakeside Drive. All right, so this is just the shift from February 2020 to now in terms of total vacancy. All markets have been impacted, but Oakland specifically has been more impacted. So these are Austin. I know everybody says Austin's doing great. They saw a vacancy increase as well. Salt Lake City, the same. A lot of these markets saw significant decline. So it's not just the Bay Area. And this is just sublease availability. And again, Northern California really is the leader, or been the one that's had the highest share of sublease vacancy compared to other markets. And again, rents are surprising. Rents, you would think, based on those vacancy rates, would have dropped further, but they have not dropped as much. And there's some reasons for that. The valuation of these buildings are such that they can only drop their rents so much before they start compromising their loan and their valuation of their building. So they can only reduce their rents so much. And as a result, the face rent have held more than in previous downturns. And this is just downtown asking rents. Again, at its peak, it was $576. Now it's at $526. That's a 9.3% decrease since Q2 of 2020. And then in 680, again, it's the same. We really haven't seen much real reduction in asking rents. Class A North 680, so that's the Walnut Creek area, a little bit more, whereas in the South Tri-Valley area, not that much at all, just about 7 cents. So I want to speak a little bit to what we're seeing on a national level that is having an impact over time and the ramifications on office. This is the associated premium by age of building. So the gray line represents where we were, this is all national data, where we were prior to the pandemic. There was a premium for newer buildings, but that premium was lower. What we've seen now is since the pandemic, there's been command or interest in newer, high quality spaces. There's been a flight to quality overall nationally and also here in the Bay Area, where we've seen that premium actually go up. And what's also really fascinating is if your building is even 5 years older, then you're on par with the market. Whereas before, you still got a marginal premium. That has really changed. What's happened is if you're a brand new spanking building, that's where the premiums really exist. So one thing to think about is just overall functional obsolescence and where buildings are right now. We are overall, what we're seeing is buildings that are older, we think are going to ultimately be structurally obsolescent. They're going to see vacancy rise. That market is going to ultimately be converted over to residential, lab, and other uses. And then the buildings that are differentiated, we're going to see them grow at a normal escalated rate over time. And that's generally our philosophy for the market. So if you can think of the East Bay buildings that are Class B type buildings, those buildings are ultimately, we think a lot of those will be converted over time to other uses. So one of the things that we talk about is life science as an option. I'll go a little bit into what's happening there. If you just look at the life science market overall, we know that rents are escalating and vacancy remains low. Total direct vacancy in the Bay Area is at 2.9%. If you take the Oakland Metro, which includes Emeryville, Berkeley, and Alameda, we're at a direct vacancy of 6%. Compare that to the office direct vacancy, which is over 17%. It's actually over 20% in downtown Oakland. You can see why there'd be some interest in those conversions, but the total inventory is much smaller. So we're talking about an existing supply of 6.4 million in the Oakland Metro, and we're around 50 plus million in the Oakland Metro for office. So it's a very different size of inventory. We're not going to convert our way out of the market. It's not, there's not enough demand in this sector to simply reduce our entire vacant supply in the office side. We do have a lot of inventory that is coming on the market, which I'll speak to. These are where vacancy is. You could see that total availability is at 14%. That availability is mostly new supply that is coming onto the market. This is for the Bay Area overall. Sublease space is at 3.7%, while high, not nearly the same levels as office. And direct vacancies at 10.3%, or this is direct availability, excuse me, which includes a lot of that new supply that I just mentioned. If you look at where we are on rents, this is why the conversion is of interest. We're at $6.34 triple net. In other words, if you put in the full service costs associated with that, you're going to add another $1.20 at least to that number, which is a very high rent level for the Oakland Metro, and generally is incentivizing building owners to go that direction. And we saw a lot of leasing activity over the last 2 years. We saw an average of 3.8 million versus 2.4 million from 2015 to 2019, or 900,000 from 2010 to 2014. So a real increase in the amount of lab space consumed and committed to, We don't know if that's an enduring trend. In fact, we would expect something more like what we saw in 2015 and 2019. One thing that we did take a look at and what's driving a lot of this VC demand is the investments, the investment from the VC side into life science. And roughly there's a direct correlation, well, there is a direct correlation between the amount of venture capital investment in the lab sector and in the life science sector and their interest in consuming space. So right now it's about, for every $1 million in funding, results in about 425 square feet in leasing activity. And there's incredible variability there. So I wouldn't use that metric as like a hard number, but it gives you an idea. And what we've seen is once they receive that capital investment, about 140 days later, on average, they transact on a space. So as a result, we've seen a lot of growth in this sector specifically. And this just shows, lastly, something on the lab supply. So in 2021, we had approximately 29.7 million square feet of lab space in the Bay Area. We are set by 2025 to have 47 million. That's a significant increase, obviously. So you're going from 30 million to 47 million. I think that'll drag a little bit, and we could see that 47 million come on in 2026 and 2027, but that's a significant injection of supply over a very short period of time. So we would expect that the market would stabilize as that injection of supply comes online. So I'm going to end with our Bay Area big bets, or these are the things that I think are going to happen. You guys can argue with me or send me an email and say, you know, Quinn, you were wrong. This didn't happen, but I'm happy to talk a little bit more in the conversation. So basically, we think that office leasing will return in San Francisco, and I'll explain why. Artificial intelligence really sees an explosion, and that explosion will really manifest here in the Bay Area. And then finally, we'll see Bay Area population growth next year. So why do we expect leasing activity to return? So since on average, San Francisco averaged about 1.7 million square feet quarter leasing activity. Since the pandemic, is about 1.2 million square feet. But what's happening is there's a rollover that's occurring, and that rollover is lease expiration driven. And we expect a lot of that demand simply to be by the lease expirations. We have 1.8 million square feet per quarter from 2023 to 2025 in terms of lease expirations, a little bit over 8 million square feet of space that is going to expire. And even if we take a really aggressive downside assumption of 40%, it means that we'll probably just alone get 1.1 million square feet a quarter on that alone. And then if you add in what was the historic average, we get somewhere around 1.8 million in total leasing activity. Not as relevant for this group, but it's still important because that is real commitments. So on the AI side, SoftBank showed this in one of their quarterlies when they were getting a lot of criticism. And what they showed is, this is our thesis. Our thesis is, if you look at internet traffic versus the market cap of internet companies, they grew at the same rate. What they think is going to happen, and a lot of economists think it's going to happen on the AI side, is the more stored data that we have, it will be the same equivalent in terms of valuation of AI companies. This is their current thesis. And this is the global forecast. It's AI is a $15.7 trillion global, it will contribute 15.7 trillion in GDP by 2030. And so that's a 39% per annum or 38% per annum growth rate. And guess where it's concentrated? It's really, there's two areas where this is being invested in. One is the US, two is China. And there's a race between those two markets. But if you go a little bit closer and you look at what's happened in the Bay Area, the Bay Area specifically has the highest concentration of that total investment. It accounts for, I believe we are at sorry, I'm doing this off memory because the slide's missing. We are 7.7 million square feet of occupied space in the AI space. So as a result, we think we are growing the most of all of the other markets in terms of AI. So I want to look a little bit at population growth. This is probably the conversation du jour. If you look at where we are, basically overall, we've seen legal immigration within the US drop at 60%. Why is this relevant? Because in the Bay Area, really depends on our net population growth is based on, it's based on international migration. The purple represents domestic outmigration. The gray represents international migration. You can see what happened over time. So we saw a 65% reduction from 2019 to 2021. And the result was just a complete decline in that market overall. And that has not allowed us to backfill from a population growth perspective. That's why we saw negative population over the last few years. We expect that to change. And part of that is driven by students. Students are back. They're not on their Zoom calls. That's 175,000 in the Bay Area. And they're back in this market. A lot of those students are also foreign students. And also what we're seeing is another dynamic. The affordability of our market has shifted incredibly in our, hard to believe, but this is median household income versus prevailing asking rents from 2019 versus 2021, or excuse me, 2022. So this is 2019 versus 2022 numbers. You can see what the asking rent is, what it was in 2019 versus where it is now as a percentage of median household income. So while median household income went up, rents did not. And what we saw is across most markets, the affordability became less. So Tampa, Miami, Las Vegas became much less affordable because their incomes did not rise at the same rate as rents. That's why they're talking a lot about inflation in those markets. But whereas we saw the opposite happen. So in San Francisco, for example, the median household income rose in 2022 based on our best estimates compared to rents, which have dropped. So we're, instead of it being on average 29% of gross median household income, now it's 22%. The same can be said for places like the East Bay. Why is that relevant? Because we become much more affordable. And if you compare that to other markets, it means that your ability to move to a place like Denver or somewhere else, that variance is not nearly as strong as it used to be. So we think that over time, what we're going to see this year is both a reduction in the domestic outmigration and an increase in the international migration. So we'll start to see population growth next year. So this is my thesis. We'll see how it plays out. I think that I'm not the only one who believes this. This is Oxford Economics forecast for the every metro in the US, or every major metro in the US. And you can see that the Bay Area overall is in that top right axis. So if you think of the real GDP growth is from 2021 to 2030, that's the vertical axis. And then from employment growth is your horizontal axis. And you can see that the Bay Area overall looks very good. And even the East Bay, which historically has tracked on average nationally, is forecasted to grow faster overall than the US. So with that, I will allow the panelists and the conversation to begin.
Thanks, Quinn. That was pretty excellent presentation. There are a lot of questions, and then I will bring up some challenges to some of your thesis. that came in the Q&A or elsewhere. First, I want to introduce, we have, besides Quinn, who's the director of Northern California JLL Research, who you just heard, we have Mike Ghielmetti, who will introduce himself in a couple seconds, president and founder of Signature Development Company, and David Stark, Chief Public Affairs Officer for the East Bay Association of Realtors. I really want to hear from him later on where he thinks about housing. And then myself, Ed Del Beccaro, Bay Area Manager for Tri-Valley Commercial Real Estate and Vice Chair of EDA. So we have a series of questions that I'm going to ask the panelists first, and I will get in several of the questions that came through the Q&A. If you want to ask questions, please put them in the Q&A slot chat room, and we will ask those. I will ask those. So first, actually, let's talk about housing, about your thesis. And I'd be curious. So let's assume fact, Bay Area income is rising faster than the price of rental and housing. What I've seen some studies on is that then we're creating a barbell economy. So it's great for those with high incomes, you know, 150 to 250,000. But if you only make 60 to 120, the middle class workforce, it's hard. That's why that kind of tenant, the fire tenants, financial are migrating out, being replaced by life science. So I'll ask, we have three people very involved in housing. So Quinn, you first.
Yeah, that's definitely the case. That's happening in the Bay Area. And what we saw historically was the growth of domestic outmigration of lower middle income households going to more affordable markets. What was the backfill were higher educated foreign born individuals who were relocating to the inner Bay Area. So I don't think that that dynamic is shifting. Rather, I think that we're just going to see more of a backfill of the international migrants to the Bay Area.
David, what are you seeing?
Oh, thanks for the opportunity to join this morning. And by the way, I work for the Bay East Association of Realtors, and just happy to share our perspective. The big factor for us is interest rates and what impact that's, you mentioned the buying power that that lower wage households are going to have or not have. At 3%, assuming a $900,000 purchase price at 20% down, the economists for the California Association of Realtors estimated about a $4,000 a month mortgage payment. At 7%, they estimate a $5,800 mortgage payment. And in terms of real buying power, if you're at 150,000 K and you've got that $3,700 payment available to you, at 3%, that was an $830,000 home. At 8%, which is what we may end up with, that's $530,000, and at 6%, that's $630,000. So you can see the real buying power of that segment that is out migrating. You're seeing the reason why. It's not just the factors that are pushing on the Bay Area economy and shifting the job mix, but it's these larger macroeconomic factors, particularly interest rates, that could be causing that migration of those particular job sectors.
And Michael, you build homes. What are you seeing? Brooklyn Basin, elsewhere?
Well, I think I agree with Mr. Quinn that the barbell effect is in full effect, and in fact, it's only been exacerbated, both in terms of housing, but also in terms of jobs and companies. We also have office spaces, and we see an outbound migration of companies that are kind of low to mid-level profit and production based versus kind of the tech and higher margin companies that can afford the cost of living.
In fact, that leads to my next question, which you've all seen, panelists, is there's been a number of high profile companies, whether it's Chevron and others that have left the Bay Area. But there was a recent Hoover study that says almost 156 headquarters have left California in the last so many years alone. So Michael, you first. What are yours? Because you have office buildings, and what are you seeing in terms of that, whether it's Oakland or elsewhere?
Well, I think if the question is regard to Oakland, Oakland's been on the losing side of that. I think downtown San Francisco has been on the losing side of that, and I think parts of the peninsula have been on the losing side of that. I think some of the what were formerly periphery markets, more suburban markets, lower costs. My thought is in chatting with some of my development peers out there is they've been net beneficiaries. But I think that's parsed out again through Mr. Quinn's thoughts is in Class A or Class B real estate, they're flocking to Class A more cost-effective offices, and so there's been a dispersion of where people office. And again, that's anecdotal based on conversations with peers and not data driven that was in the prior presentation. But we're definitely seeing a change in migration patterns, and it's definitely affecting downtown areas and is going to hit the tax rolls in a negative way of local and county governments in a year or two.
Yeah, I would add to that. There has been an out-migration, especially of some of the more older tech companies to places like Austin, especially in name. Tesla is the most notable that most of us are aware of. I would note on the same week that they announced their relocation to Austin, they leased 350,000 square feet in R&D space in Stanford Research Park. If you look, I subtract out all of the companies that have established their HQ out of the Bay Area. And I look at the comparison from Q1 2020 to right now. And right now we're at, not to be too precise, 46.1% above where we were Q1 of 2020. So that's our market cap of Bay Area companies, even after subtracting out all of those companies that have left the Bay Area, they're still up 46% within the Bay Area. So there's a crowding effect that's occurring, and some of those companies have decided that they are moving out of our region simply because they can't afford to pay the talent here, and they're finding talent elsewhere simply by what we're experiencing.
I might add, Ed, we chatted about this a little bit in our preview call. One of the reasons that is stated by folks is for us is and again, hearing from some of my peers in Oakland and San Francisco in particular, are quality of life issues. They've had break-ins, they've had some of their employees suffer from crime and blight. And so that is an issue as well. It's not 100% cost related, but costs are a portion of it. Again, talent recruitment and retention and just overall rent burden, but there are also quality of life issues.
We're going to come back to quality of life, Michael, in a few minutes. But David, what are your members seeing in terms of who the new buyers of houses are versus the ones that are leaving?
So we don't really track those kinds of demographics because fair housing is a very important thing for the real estate industry. That said, there is some curiosity. I made a presentation at an office meeting yesterday, and there are some questions about the status of H-1B visas because many agents recognize the importance of international buyers coming in, which speaks to the attractiveness of the San Francisco Bay Area from a residential perspective. What's fascinating about these headlines that scream either about the exodus, the population exodus out of the San Francisco Bay Area, or more specifically the departure of headquarters that Alexander referred to, is that, and I think you're going to hear this theme a few more times later, is that the net impact on the jobs housing imbalance and the demand for homeownership, particularly in the East Bay, particularly on the 680 corridor, remains high. So when you take a look at residential trends that have occurred over the last 6 months, the decrease in home sales, the decrease in sales prices, that isn't necessarily driven by this so-called exodus out of the Bay Area. That's driven, again, by the macroeconomic factors that I referred to earlier, interest rates. So demand for homeownership is still extremely high. And if we have a second later, we can talk about sales prices and where the last few months fit with a larger context. It's fun to read, it's fun to write about these scary things like these departures, but the fundamental mismatch between jobs and housing still exists in the East Bay.
Okay, we'll get back to that later. But to you, Quinn, now, one of the questions from the audience was, so we have relatively low unemployment. At the same time, we can't fill a lot of the basic jobs in hospitality and other industries. How do you explain that dilemma or dichotomy?
Well, it's a housing issue, right? I mean, that's what we're all talking about. That's actually drawing down or dragging down our economic growth. But yes, there are a considerable amount of vacancies, job vacancies in the leisure and hospitality sector specifically that are hard to fill. The market is leaning towards a recession in Q1 and Q2, almost expecting it. In fact, Oxford Economics overall has a recession predicted for the next Q1 and Q2 of next year. And that softness in the market might have the impact of more people willing to go into, the leisure and hospitality sector. But so far, that has not been the case.
So Michael, from your side, what are you seeing in construction, the trades, building out tenant improvements in terms of job vacancies or getting talent?
I see it as extremely tight right now, but I think there's also, two different messages. A lot of the slides that Quinn had there were really, I think, partially reflective of the first quarter and second quarter activity, which is really holdover from investments in Q3 and Q4 of 21, which were kind of go-go years in terms of investment. But I think that, look, talking to some of the unions about their projections and where they see, their hiring halls shaken out in 3 to 6 to 9 months, and chatting with some of the subcontractors, they're getting a lot less inbound inquiries. So we do anticipate that construction unemployment is going to rise fairly dramatically in the next 6 months. But we also opened up a hotel and have a number of small business tenants that have, restaurants and boutiques and such, and they are all struggling mightily to attract and retain talent. We just had a small local restaurant tell us they're going dark, and they're still going to pay us rent. It's cheaper for them to pay us rent than to continue to hire, train, and lose employees. Especially because they're mainly a lunch focused business. When you have a lower these office swipes, or whatever you call the Castle systems data, you just don't have enough people to hit that kind of 11 to 2 lunch rush. It's really more of a 12 to 1 lunch kind of lope.
Well, that partially reflects in the hospitality and restaurants, even if you pay 30% above minimum wage. $30 an hour, it's hard to afford rent and housing in the Bay Area. So those people commute from a long way. So that's part of the barbell. So
yeah, but that wasn't a lot different in 2019 and 18. And the labor market was tight in 19 to be sure. But rents are down since then. They didn't recover, at least in Class A, but I believe in the East Bay rents are still down overall, especially in my major markets, which are the inner East Bay. So maybe the East Bay is better off, but I think they're maybe covered more from, say, Walnut Creek and Danville and those types of markets. And Oakland is down for sure still. And so cost of living is actually better, but the labor market for some reason is smaller. And you chat with a lot of the entrepreneurs, again, owners of restaurants and boutiques, and they'll tell you in their X years in this business, fill in the blank, they've never seen a labor market like this.
Okay, very good. So I'm going to switch gears. There's several questions on remote work trends, mandates for being forced to go back to work or not. So I'm going to start with Alex, then David. So Quinn, what do you see in terms of present remote work trends? How long will it last? How's it impacting the office market?
Well, it's definitely impacting the office market. It's having a real impact. We have still 7.3 million square feet of sublease space in San Francisco alone, which accounts for about half, I believe, of total sublease inventory in the market. And a lot of that is driven by the work from home, remote friendly environments, especially of tech companies. And I can give you a long list of companies that have decided that they're going to go remote friendly. Now, I mentioned the unemployment rate is at 2.3% in San Francisco. Guess what it is among software engineers? It's next to nothing. So there's no competition there. And as a result, the C-suite has very little leverage to bring workers back. And people like working in their pajamas and washing their clothes and all that during the middle of the day. So it is, in commuting is not fun. So as a result, we've seen a lot of leverage on the side of the worker that says, hey, I can do my work from home, and they have not pushed back. Slowly, we're starting to see that leverage change. Apple, most notably, is 3 days a week. Google, similar, 3 days a week. And we're seeing that more and more. We also got some interesting productivity stats and IP, intellectual property stats that imply that productivity is in fact down, which we all kind of know, but we don't want to talk about. And companies definitely don't want to talk about their reduced productivity. But we are seeing intellectual property patents go down, and they've gone down for the first time in over a decade. We know on a GDP per employee that's going down. That's actually related to some other dynamics. But I think really the most fundamental thing is the serendipitous creation that we expect to happen in the office that brings us here in the first place, and why we pay these exorbitant rents, and why we have all these fancy things at the office. That hasn't happened, and that hasn't materialized, and it's having a cascading consequence on business. But if you ask the direct question, how is it impacting office? The answer is a lot, and it will continue to have a significant impact really out until 2023, 2024 at the latest, or at the earliest, we won't see a real recovery.
So as social animals, we don't invent as much when we wear pajamas as when we are in the office.
Yeah, well, all you have to do is look at the school scores of children and understand that in-person learning is more important. And I know we're not children, but we still gain a benefit from being next to each other, and we're losing that, especially among our young employees.
So David, I hear there's trends in housing where in order to have to build a new townhouse with single family, it's now market required to have an office, not just an extra bedroom, so that people can work remote. What do you see?
So pre-pandemic, if we were talking about the value and the future of Tri-Valley real estate, 680 real estate, even East Bay real estate, it would have been location, location, location. Particularly along the 680 corridor pre-pandemic, we're closer to the job centers. So it was an easier commute, and workers were willing to pay a premium for that, plus the quality of life issues. During pandemic, it's no longer location, location, location. It's bedrooms, bedrooms, bedrooms. Because of development patterns here along 680 are a newer product. The footprint may not necessarily be larger, but there are more bedrooms and homes along the 680 corridor, which allowed for, particularly during the height of the pandemic, not only work from home, but school from home as well. So looking at other product types throughout the East Bay, the Tri-Valley 680 corridor in particular is still going to remain attractive because the actual buildings, the home that you're working from will accommodate your standalone office. So even with these return to work mandates, 680 corridor, parts of the East Bay still in that sweet spot in terms of a shorter commute, and the work from home flexibility, again, we're in that sweet spot in terms of bedrooms, bedrooms, bedrooms. So just to play this note a few more times, the downturns that we've seen in terms of a slower market, fewer home sales, some price reductions, which are just the headlines love to talk about that because we haven't seen it in a decade. That's not necessarily driven by the microeconomic factors here in the East Bay, the ability to work from home or having to go back in the office, but that's driven by macroeconomic factors. Homeownership in the East Bay is still going to be very desirable.
Switching gears, Michael, one of the questions we discussed previously was cities in California have resisted building housing for many years. And now we have the state through the RENA requirements requiring various cities from Palo Alto to Danville and Oakland, of course, to build more housing. So how do you see this? What kinds of policy reforms should we be actually doing to get more housing?
Everything. I think I remember reading a study in the late 90s that the Bay Area should be producing somewhere around 35,000 permits a year, and I think the state was supposed to be doing, say, 200 to 250,000 a year. I think that the peak on those was just before the Great Recession. I think the Bay Area kind of peaked in the the low to mid 20,000, and the state, I think, was 150 to 200,000. It never recovered. So we're so far behind. I don't know how the heck we catch up. And NIMBYs are still going to be NIMBYs, and nothing's going to change them. The millennials and the Gen Zs, I think, are my hope that we can convert some NIMBYs to YIMBYs. But there's still, we are the chattering classes here, and we are not, the Joe Public. I'll just say, the Joe Public still doesn't want new stuff built next to them that doesn't look exactly like their house. They don't want anything denser. So I don't know. I mean, there has to be fundamental overriding state laws, which may or may not provoke a backlash in the initiative process to revoke those. So I don't have an answer other than there has to be a political way to do it. And I also don't think you can solve this problem by building 8-story plus product, because that's the least affordable product. For me to build a type 3, 5/2 type structure in downtown Oakland, or candidly anywhere in the Bay Area other than San Francisco, which is more expensive than anywhere. I'm looking at $600,000 to $650,000 a door at an absolute minimum to build that product. In normal markets, I try not to be a nonprofit. In markets like this, I am de facto a nonprofit. You have to be able to make a profit, at least on paper, to attract the capital, institutional and debt, et cetera, to build that stuff. And I can't market that stuff at $2 rents. It just doesn't pencil. So I have to market that stuff at $4.50 rents or $5 rents, or it doesn't work. Or I have to market the product at $850,000 to $900,000 when you look at all the carry costs, et cetera, for condominiums. And that's just not sustainable. So it's a twofold issue for me. One is political will, probably emanating from the state, but certainly from locals, number one. And number two, trying to attract a more diverse product offering than the oft shown environmentally best solution, which I build a lot of, but it's not the solution from an affordability standpoint.
By affordability, for 900,000, you need $250,000 combined household income.
Can I jump on that real quick?
Go ahead. You're the expert.
So I've been in the housing policy space for 30 years, and Michael's right on. This is the chattering class. We know what the solutions are, the policy solutions. I want to be more basic than that. I remember as a kid in the 70s, some serious droughts that we experienced in California, and the behavior changes that occurred because of that. We had another, we're in the middle of another historic drought, and you can see some behavior changes regarding, how landscaping is done by individual property owners. I'm just going to pull the Band-Aid off on this one. Unless and until there's a serious enough crisis there where we're willing to change our behaviors and willing to change our perceptions of what neighborhoods look like, we're not going to see the policy changes that we need. And Michael's exactly right. NIMBY's rule. And what's fascinating to see the pushback from some local communities about these state mandates. Those pushbacks are going to continue unless and until we see some changes to TEQA as well, which I believe was only going to come from a grassroots perspective. All the policies that come down from Sacramento will be tied up either in various colors of lawsuits or just the economics of building. I don't think Michael really got into that yet, but that's another factor we've got to consider, that there's the policy perspective, there's the political environment, and then there's the realities and the economics of building new housing. If we can just put that very significant issue aside for a second, it really needs to be a conversation with the folks that you talk to tonight, or you talk to over the weekend, or you talk to, at your family gatherings. Unless and until we as a California society recognize this as a problem and have the courage to make some changes, all the policies in the world are just going to sit there on the books, be challenged in court, and maybe produce a few units, but really not move the needle.
Staying with you, David, then I'm going to ask Quinn. Assuming then that policies are not changed too much in the next 2 or 3 years, what are the internal migration patterns you see within the greater Bay Area? So does East Contra Costa County benefit? Does Tri-Valley benefit? Sacramento, or at the expense of San Francisco Inner Bay? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, there's a few different factors there. And I know I keep keep saying this, but interest rates are really going to be the overriding concern in terms of any kind of homeownership trends. So let's assume that interest rates stabilize, say at 6% or 5%. Then I would take a look at, you know, employment centers, working from home, the same factors that have already been discussed in this call. Tri-Valley is going to continue to remain very attractive. Another thing that is, you know, we passed Proposition 19 a couple of years ago, which allows for a transfer of property tax basis that's going to be very attractive to some baby boomers and older homeowners. That may allow some more out-migration out of the San Francisco Bay Area. But if individuals are going to be in the workforce longer because their retirement portfolio took a hit during the last couple of years, that changes up that equation as well. These issues about, you know, perception of public safety, quality of life, that still is going to drive the fact that 680 corridor parts of the East Bay will continue to be a magnet. If you look at demographics, the increasing percentage of millennials and whatever the generation is that comes after millennials, we're looking at family creation, we're looking at the production of children. Where do they want that to happen? Do they want that to happen in these, you know, arguably hip urban centers, or do they want to have a suburban experience? So there's a lot of X factors there. I think regardless of where any of those X factors go, Tri-Valley 680 corridor, as I said earlier, is still going to remain attractive. I'd like to hear Alexander's take on this as well, because he's got his finger on more of these, you know, regional economic pulses as well.
You're next.
Yeah, I mean, we started seeing prior to 2020 the out-migration to the suburbs of millennials. We were already seeing it there in their family formation period. And guess what? You know, you don't need to be downstairs from, or upstairs, excuse me, from a bar. You need to be, you know, they're looking for more suburban environments and good school districts. It's a different dynamic. And that's a huge cohort that is deciding to make a move, and they're moving mostly to places like the East Bay and to more affordable ownership. When I say affordable, I mean ownership markets. And since the pandemic, that's just accelerated that land development curve that we all learned, or okay, I learned in college, where you say the closer you are to your employment, the higher the value of you are. That has just been extended or smoothed out further and further as people are willing to extend their commute out longer, simply by the fact that they're going in 3 days a week instead of 5 days a week. So we think that means that places in the further out, like Contra Costa County, Livermore, those areas are markets that are going to see more of that. But at the same time, what's happened is interest rates have increased. So the affordability to buy a home has gone down considerably. What does that mean? It means that more of them have to be renters, whether they like it or not. So we think what's going to happen is you're going to see markets like Oakland, and I'm not just speaking to Mike. I know that seems like it, but we're actually think that we're going to see rents grow in places like Oakland and San Francisco as we see a reversion to the mean. In other words, we're going to see the markets that did really well, like Denver, Miami, Phoenix, they will not do as well in the next few years. Whereas the core markets like the Bay Area will do well, LA will do well, as people go back to core, which is, this is a core market.
So Michael, developers by definition are optimistic, otherwise you wouldn't build. Do you agree with that? Bay Area is good for good times for housing next 3 years?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, so yes, I think I've been saying that for several years, and I've been wrong for several years, but eventually I will be right that next year will be better. What's the expression? Even a broken clock is right twice a day. So yeah, certainly, you know, there was a great cover of a magazine, a Time magazine, saying, you know, is the California dream dead? And the whole magazine was dedicated to why California in essence sucked and would never come back. And the date on it was November of 1991. So the Bay Area has been called out before. The California has been called out before. You know, we have great, you know, innovative workforce. So yes to all that. The issue is coming out of the Great Recession, which the Bay Area actually fared very well compared to the rest of the country. It took a long time for housing growth to happen again. And what I think, unfortunately, the issue is going to be housing production is going to be stymied for years. And that's a combination of interest rate environment, to be sure, and the negative rent growth that has occurred. I mean, my number one conversation with capital partners right now is, trying to convince them that the Bay Area will come back. That's going to take a year or two. And if it takes 1 to 3 years or 2 to 4 years to get entitlements, and for some of this denser product, 2 to 3 years to build, it's 3 to 5 to 7 years before we're going to start to see market development again. And that's bad from a policy standpoint. That will shift rent growth to higher mode. And we go back to this kind of boom bust cycle where we're really overbuilding in about 2 years out of 10. In this case, it was probably 3 or 4 years out of 10, at least in the major metro markets like Oakland and San Francisco and say North San Jose and those places. But the reason that was strung out is because absorption slowed down because of the pandemic. Otherwise, it probably would have been that snake eating a pig analogy of 2 years, and really it's 4. But I think it's terrible that it takes 6, 8 years, of entitlement and regulatory battling to get that product approved, to fight it out for 2 years, and then to have a landlord market again for the next 8. So it's a depressing cycle.
Yeah, I mean, I do feel from a policy, and especially for this audience specifically, I know we are hesitant to convert a lot of office space to other uses, employment generated uses, to residential. But I think that it should be encouraged, especially among that antiquated supply that I just referenced. I don't think it's going to add fiscally that much to the city to hold on to old Class B type product, that 1980s stuff or older, to the extent that there are buildings that can be converted to residential, that should be considered. And dare I say that they should consider not including an inclusionary requirement on those conversions. So instead of doing inclusionary housing on office buildings, you could create that middle income. It would incentivize the conversion and help stabilize the office market, and allow also a much needed middle to occur in that specifically.
That's just not going to happen in the urban areas with mid to high rise. I think the costs are too great. Where I think that could happen is giant swaths of say the 680 corridor that have those old office buildings, someone put a ficus in the middle of, from 1965, the Walnut Creek, Concord, Danville, San Ramon have to be tens of millions of square feet of that. And they had probably a 30% FAR on the land. So there's lots of land coverage for like a little, dinky 2-story office building. Those plays are fabulous. And I think cities and counties and the state should consider the tax loss of those as those fade into oblivion. And if they can get converted to residential, you're going to prop up and minimize the tax loss. And maybe, in kind of a son of redevelopment, you could use some of that to help subsidize the difference. Because I agree with you, if the burdens of fees and inclusionary housing are put on, I know those are sacred principles in the Bay Area, but I just want everyone to know those are taxes on housing. And when you tax things, you minimize them. That's why they have soda taxes and tobacco taxes, and housing taxes minimize them. So when you put those burdens on, you're gonna slow down the formation of that stuff. And if you mandate that they're all, 5/2 type 3 buildings, you're going to slow that down too.
So that's pretty compelling. So, to your point, I bet almost 40% of 680 East Contra Costa, parts of Tri-Valley, that B and C class office buildings are over 40 and 60 years old. The woody walk-ups literally from the 60s and 70s with, in the old business parks. So David, this will be our last question on housing before we move up back to business. Do you see I know in Walnut Creek, there's some old office buildings in the Shadelands, outside the Shadelands that might be torn down. Bishop Branch is tearing down office buildings to build housing. Do you see a market for that?
Absolutely. I mean, we're here in Pleasanton, we're seeing some plans for redeveloping, and I know that that's sort of a pejorative term in some areas, reimagining, I should say, the Stone Ridge Mall with a significant residential use as well. And as part of the last few RENA cycles, there have been, in addition to regional malls, but some of our office complexes that have been overparked, particularly now in a post-pandemic world, that have been eyed for potential residential development as well. And I think that if I can pivot just a little bit, there was a question in the chat about the democratization of residential development because of ADU laws and interest in the ability for some homeowners to split their lots. Those policies look great on paper. They're fun to talk about. Every time here at the Realtor Association, we do a class on ADUs. It's a sellout. People are fascinated by ADUs. Reality check. Just finding a contractor these days to do a bathroom remodel is tough. You want to find someone to build an ADU in your backyard. That's a challenge as well. And I understand there's a nascent industry that's evolving around ADUs, but the realities of doing residential construction, you think it's hard for folks like Michael that are in this business. They're able to scale their costs and spread that over many doors. If you're just an individual homeowner, the economic realities of doing an ADU can be breathtaking, not to mention the complexities of going through the entitlement process, dealing with potential pushback from neighbors, even if it's in a by right situation. I mention this because in terms of what actually is feasible, it's fun to talk about ADUs, but the reimagining of some of these underused properties, whether they're regional malls or office buildings, a favorite one of mine is taking a look at some of these single stack strip malls that are overparked as well. Could that be an opportunity also? So if you're looking at what's feasible, I would talk to people like Alexander and Michael who are actually in the trenches that understand the costs of doing some of these things. Again, fun to look at, fun to talk about academically, great coffee house conversation, but when you look at the dollars and cents of doing residential development as an individual homeowner, be patient and bring all your money.
I think ADU is Greek for marriage wrecker.
So Quinn, we're going to go back to some business. So if you could do two public policy changes. So for instance, life sciences, biotech, and various related industries are growing fast in Emeryville, South San Francisco. What would the adjoining suburban cities need to do to catch some of that employment in terms of use
tough.
permits?
Yeah, that's really
process.
tough. The use permit thing is really just marginal. What they say in life science, it's not location, it's talent. And it's driven by the universities and all the PhDs in these specific markets. So it's no surprise that you've got South San Francisco or the North County of San Mateo as a concentration, because there's a huge concentration of PhDs in that market. It's no surprise that Mission Bay exists because there's UCSF. There's no surprise that you see it in Emeryville and Berkeley. It's because you have UC Berkeley that's right there. So those are hard things to change. And it's why it's really hard. Although we are seeing it in the Tri-Valley area, there are a few things that you can do. I guess one is design really high quality executive housing near education centers to have the PhDs want to locate there. That's I say that almost in jest. The second is just make sure you have incredibly high quality of life and good educational institutions. Those are long-term plays. I'll tell you that we get this question asked of us in every metro in the US. They asked us to say, how can we become the next life science hub akin to Boston and San Francisco? And it's incredibly a long haul. So it's not a short game.
Michael, any thoughts from you on what cities like Oakland or other cities should be doing to attract business as opposed to persuade them to leave?
So, I mean, I would add one thing, sorry, just there is a part of the life science that is growing outside of those major educational hubs, and it's called CGMP. It's the manufacturing part of it. And we are seeing growth in that demand. And so the lower 580 corridor, or no, sorry, 880 corridor is one, like Hayward and Newark, that's an area. Also, we're seeing in Vacaville and Fairfield that same dynamic. And those are really proximate to those R&D hubs. They have to be, but they are a manufacturing element, and they're generally well-paying positions, middle income type positions that are available. And those type of operations can exist and do exist in industrial nodes.
I think that's important to note that. So Michael, what would you do if you were economic czar what was some city processes to get business into Oakland or repeal?
Great question. I think some of it's like the housing that was done, many years ago, a decade or more, is the notion of specific plans, pre-entitling areas or neighborhoods, if you will. The Uptown Valdez area in Oakland, where my office is, comes to mind, where it was pre-entitled for X amount of housing units, some office space, some retail space, and so it still was a hurdle to get the design review done and things like that, but it was a lot easier. And as I was saying, there's only certain market cycles where housing is viable, but the question as it relates to life science or different niche industries, and I think the same thing applies. So if I'm a life science developer, I've got an opportunity, a window here, and I need to be able to land a tenant and start a building. And if I'm kind of doing entitlements ground up, I'm going to miss that window more than likely. So having the entitlements ready to go, and a building that you're ready to basically break ground on in the near term, and then I'm giving certainty to the marketplace in terms of a life science tenant, I think would help a lot. I think the broader cost of quality of life issues play into it as well.
Very good. Quinn, back to you. A question I didn't ask before on remote. Anecdotally, I think the panel agrees that going back to work is more productive, et cetera. Are there actual studies yet been done, or is it just anecdote?
There is a study Microsoft did of their employee engagement specifically because they're tracking this, and that's why they're trying to get their employees back. But companies are very hesitant to advertise their lack of productivity, especially publicly traded companies. So most of that information remains internal. So we're doing our own analysis, just looking at IP production and productivity in general to come up with some estimates. And we do know specifically that younger employees are more impacted than older employees.
Very good. A couple minutes, so 1 minute closing from each of the panelists on economic trends or housing trends that you didn't note before. So starting with you, Michael, 1 minute.
Well, in terms of housing trends, there's what's happened and what needs to happen. We need to build more housing, and we also need to stop focusing exclusively on the quote unquote ideal of 100 units to an acre type 8-story buildings. We need to have a diversity of product. High rise and mid rise have a place. Candidly, townhomes are going to end up being the bulk of the for sale product built, and that's probably 15 to 35 units to an acre type product. And in some cases, some very dense detached homes still have a place in the marketplace too. Is that probably 10 to 18 units to an acre, 10 to 15 units to an acre. So that is critical. It's probably the original sin in the Bay Area, at least in the last 35 years, is dropping our housing production. And everything suffers from it. Traffic patterns, employee retention and recruitment, the types of businesses that the Bay Area can attract. And right now, it's really only the richest of the types of industries and companies can afford to be here. So in order to that revert to mean, which someone said earlier, I love that, we've got to be able to produce this other type of product as well.
So
David.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Then Quinn. Quinn, you get to be the final.
Two thoughts. First is that policymakers, particularly at the local level, need to responsibly plan for high quality of life, whether that's public safety or economic development. They need to recognize that it's great if you want to keep your community charming, but understand that communities change. They either are getting better or they're getting worse. And the image of what charming or attractive may be right now may need to evolve. Second, and I'm going to rip the Band-Aid off, we need to stop demonizing home builders and rental housing providers. They are part of the solution, and the policies need to recognize that they are part of the solution. We need to take a hard look at some of these policies that have been passed during the pandemic to protect certain segments of our societies and understand what negative consequences they may have. And Michael and rental housing providers, they're here to help. They're here to solve this crisis. Let's figure out a way to support them.
Michael's not going to go to hell. You can go to purgatory instead. Okay, Quinn.
Yeah, I would say instead of thinking big, think small. Think about the very basic municipal service governance issues, dealing with quality of life concerns, the day-to-day management of our environment. We all got complacent that it was always going to be in the Bay Area forever, and there's nothing that could supplant that. But just dealing with the day-to-day on the street issues, on the building municipal service level will have a meaningful impact on the quality. And I'll give just one example. In the downtown, there was the business improvement district that was adopted in San Francisco for the North Financial District. Every investor that comes into San Francisco now says, boy, it's not as bad as I've read about. And I know that seems really simple, but it's something that's achievable. And it's something that we can actually do to improve just the overall quality of life and perception of our region.
Very good. I'm handing it back now to you, Stephen.
Yeah, well, thank you all so much, and let's give it up for Quinn for his great presentation, and to our great panel with Mike and David and Ed for your fantastic moderating. I know we are at time, and so just want to again thank our sponsor for today's event, Bank of America, and also Southwest Airlines. Todd Williams from Fenimore Wendell, you are the lucky winner of 2 round-trip tickets on Southwest Airlines, so we'll be in touch with you about that. All of you, thanks so much for joining us this morning. Stay connected to us online at eastbayada.org and follow us on social media, and definitely sign up for our newsletter. We try to keep current and timely information coming out to all of you. Have a great morning, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks.